In this presentation, we're going to be looking at how to use PRO-Server to log data from a PLC via a PRO-FACE HMI to an Excel spreadsheet. This presentation only provides a basic introduction to this subject. There are a lot of additional features and options that we won't have time to cover. We're going to focus on a fairly typical scenario of creating a live production report in Excel from data passed through a HMI from a PLC. At the heart of this topic is a PRO-Server action called Create Form using Excel. It's just one of many PRO-Server actions that are available. The first step is to edit or create an Excel template file that will accept the log data from this action. We'll then define the logging area within that spreadsheet that will accept the live data from the HMI. We have to decide when and how often to log this data, and we'll do that using a trigger condition. We can expand the functionality of this action by adding optional additional functions such as creating new spreadsheets, saving the data, or printing it. A single template created in this manner can be used to create a series of spreadsheet reports. For example, you may want to start a new report spreadsheet for every day or even every hour. Once the template spreadsheet and the action in PRO-Server are complete, we have to transfer the network project to the participating devices, and then we can test our project. In a moment we'll get into the software and I'll show you how this is all going to work, but I'd just like to point out a few things before that. First of all, to create the Excel template and the PRO-Server action, we have two ways to go. We can either use a PRO-Server wizard, which lets you choose from a variety of pre-made templates, or we can use the feature tab and we can create them manually. In this presentation, we're going to be creating them manually, which will help you to see how easy this process actually is to set up. To control when to begin and end logging of the Excel report, we'll be using what we call a trigger condition, which is based on data values in the HMI. Finally, this PRO-Server EX action can be used to create reports using any of these Microsoft Excel versions from 2000, 2003 to 2007. Let's take a brief look at the WinGP project that's actually going to be the source node for our data logging. As I mentioned before, this is a WinGP runtime GP Pro EX running on a PC. WinGP is only available on PRO-FACE IPCs, but for testing and development it will also run in trial mode on any PC for up to 3 hours, and that's the version that I'm using here. So here's our startup screen for the operator, and the first thing he has to do is to log in, have up to 64 unique operator IDs with their own individual passwords and security levels. And now the operator is logged on and he's ready to start work. This application was actually developed in two parts. This part here to collect data from a SQL server, and this part here which is the actual production cycle. And this is what we're going to be using today. By pressing this button, I set the start time and date, and we start to create production. You can simulate reject parts by pressing this button here. As long as it's held down, we get reject parts. And then when I'm finished, I press the cycle stop button, we stop production, we store the end time and date, and we're all set. Pressing this button logs the operator off the machine, and and we're ready for a new operator to log on and make new production. Just log back in again. And all of this data, the start time and date, the stop time and date, and these three production values are stored in a contiguous block of registers so that we can easily data log them as a single group. This is Pro Studio EX, which is the editor for Pro Server. And if you're not used to this, I'll just take you briefly through the flow of how the project development works. And it's shown quite nicely here. You start at the start, which is logical. You define nodes, which are the devices which are going to be participating in this network project, whether that be a GP3000 or a WinGP or an LT, etc. And there's always one Pro Server EX node. Having defined the participating nodes, in my case, PC, my laptop, and WinGP, which is a PC-based HMI, which I just happen to be running on my laptop. Then we move on to define the symbolic information within those participating nodes, which are typically PLC addresses with recognizable symbol names. And then we define various features. We have database related features, email actions, Excel actions, which is the one we're actually going to use today, and various others. Once we've done that, we save our project and get it started. We then transfer it to any of the participating nodes, and then we can test it using a variety of debug tools. So let's go back to the start. There are two ways to design a Pro Server file. One is to go through all the individual steps that we've just outlined, and the other is to use some of the built-in sample wizards. In this case, there's a series of forms, Excel forms, which is the one that we're actually going to do today, although we won't be using the wizard. There are recipe handling, data logging, email actions, and various others. This new form wizard gives me a good graphic though to explain the overall process of a typical configuration, and that is with a PLC containing various data relating to our production process, a HMI which can be an AGP, can be an LT built-in controller, which means we don't have a separate PLC, or it can be a Windows-based HMI, which we call WinGP. Now that HMI can be separate, but in this case we're actually going to be combining WinGP functionality on the same node as Pro Server resides. So as I mentioned, I've already defined the nodes involved here on our project, and I'm going to use a WinGP node built into the same PC as Pro Server. There it is. Note that in my case, the Ethernet IP addresses are actually the same, and that's an interesting point, that Pro Server node is running on the same PC as WinGP, but they're communicating as if they were separate parts of an Ethernet network. In other words, typically the participating nodes would be on separate IP addresses. I've already loaded in for the WinGP node a series of symbol sheets which relate the symbol names that PRO-server wants to see with actual device addresses within the HMI or PLC. In this case, I'm going to be logging a block of addresses starting here at start hour, which is LS201, and I'm going to be taking in all of these addresses in a single block. So now I have to add the action item which is going to get this done. I choose action item, I choose add, and then I choose from the list of available actions, and the one we want happens to be right at the top of the list. I give it a name. Notice that the action name can't have any spaces in, hence the use of things like underscore. And now I'm going to define that action. We start by creating the Excel sheet template, and you can either get this ready beforehand, as I've done, or you can actually start it from scratch right here. And the word reference here is basically browse. So I'm going to browse for a template that I've already created, and I'm going to open it. And notice that I'm going to open it from within Pro Studio, and there's a good reason for that. And then I'm going to edit it. So this is nothing special. We could have created this by creating a brand new template from scratch. I'm just going to save a little bit of time here, and it also helps to have thought out in advance which kind of registers data you're going to log and how often. So this currently is not anything special. I put a title, I put a normal Excel function in for today's date, and this is just plain text that I've colored in. But it's helped me to identify the area that I want to log, which is basically all of these registers, and I want to log them over a period of n items, and I can optionally choose to have the time at which the data was logged read in and stored. These items at the bottom are simply normal Excel functions to sum the data from the production, the good, the bad, and the totals. So nothing special here yet. However, you will notice that this isn't a normal set of toolbars for Excel, and what's happened is that a whole series of tools have been added temporarily to Excel by opening it from Pro Studio. So that's a very good reason why when you're starting to add the action items to this spreadsheet, you really must open it from within Pro Studio, otherwise these buttons will not appear. And there's also an additional pull-down menu up here too, which again you will not see if you try to edit this template from outside of Pro Studio. Okay, I'm just going to move that out of there to get a bit more working space. And there are a number of different tools, one-shot, device logging area, recipes, etc. So there are a whole number of functions that can be used here. The one that I'm going to use is the device logging area, and to save a little bit of time I can wipe the whole area that I'm going to use and then select device logging area. In this menu we can set up the logging action itself and also the trigger condition that we're going to work from. So starting from the top, we have to decide which Pro Server node is going to be involved, And in this case, it's going to be the WinGP node. And then we have to decide which group of symbols we're going to log from. As I mentioned earlier, I've set it up so that I can read a block starting from the symbol start hour, and I'm going to be logging 16 devices. I can choose in the format, as you can see here, to display the device names along the top, but I don't want to do that, so I'm going to uncheck that. And I could add the trigger node name, i.e. WinGP, to that list, but again, I don't want to do that. The target cell range is the one that I wiped using my mouse before we opened this dialog box. So we're going to be logging from A6 to P29. And the direction, you're going to be logging vertically. We could log horizontally. And I've chosen 24 rows of data, A6 to P29. I can choose to add a timestamp, and then you'll see that working in the sample. And I can use the time from the GP or the WinGP to do that. There are a couple of other options down here to add additional cells as spacers, and there's also a facility to be able to translate values into strings. For example, less than 50 is okay, more than 50 is bad, etc. We're not going to complicate it with that at the moment. And then a choice that when we create the sheet, do we want to clear out all the data? And we might as well. What are we going to do once we've logged more than 24 rows? Well, we can choose to clear it and start again, create a new sheet, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll. Now, I was almost tempted to press OK here. I resisted that temptation, fortunately, because before I finish creating this action in the Excel template, I want to define the trigger condition for when this data will actually be logged. What I'm going to do is to assume that the operator has to be logged on to the machine in order to operate the machine, and therefore I'm only going to log the activity at that machine while the operator is logged on. So to do that, I'm going to create a trigger condition, which takes me into another part of Pro Studio EX, and I can define a trigger called production trigger, and I can decide that this trigger is going to be active while the operator is logged on. And to do that, I'm going to access an internal bit LS9301, which is non-zero as long as the operator is logged on to the machine. That's an internal dedicated bit for that purpose, dedicated word for that purpose. And I'm going to make this condition active when LS9301 is not equal to 0. You see I had a variety of other options that I could have used, but this one is going to work for me. So while this expression is true, we'll be logging, and as soon as it becomes false, then we stop logging. By controlling the trigger cycle scan time, we can define how frequently this action is triggered, and in this case it will be 1000 milliseconds or 1 second. I'm going to close that. and then allocate the trigger condition in our Excel sheet to that trigger. You can have multiple actions from the same trigger, which is useful if you need to log data which is not contiguous. Now I'm all set. I've actually finished all the major work that I needed to do, and you'll notice that there's a boundary of little circles that shows me my logging area here, and that there is some kind of embedded action built into Excel, which we don't need to worry about. If we ever need to go back and take a look at that action definition, then we can go here and go look at the action area list. There it is. And by double clicking it, we can re-enter that same menu. So there's the complete template. There's not a lot of work in there, as you can see. To finish that off, we simply exit Excel, save the changes to the template, and finish editing. And now we're back where we started in Pro Studio, having defined the template file. Now, one template file can be used to create multiple reports. And so we need to define this output file or files. And the first thing to do is to define the folder where that data is going to be stored. By default, it chooses PRO-FACE NPX database. I'm just going to copy this one from here and paste it in here. Now, although the template file name is defined up here, the actual reports that it produces, we can choose something else. So we can call it production report, and we can append a series of special characters to the end, in this case year, month, date, or if we want to do that in US format, month, day, year. There are a variety of other special strings that you can embed there, which can include data from the source node itself. And that's it. We basically have finished the report. We've created the template, and we've created the action and the trigger from within Pro Studio. Final completion is an optional acknowledge bit, which can tell the PC that the action has been completed. You won't worry about that one now. So there's our action, there's our trigger, and we can revisit those and edit them whenever we want. So now I'm going to save and reload the project. And one of the things you're going to notice is when I do the reload, a new icon is going to appear down in this area here. So here we go. And the reason for that is that the Pro Server EX runtime has now actually started, and you can see that icon down here in the toolbar. Notice that it's opened the production report output file, which is called production report, and then the date format we chose. Just going to OK that. The last thing we have to do to actually get this running is to tell the relevant nodes that they are part of this project, and we do that by transferring this network project or NPX file to all of the participating nodes. In our case, it's just one node. So I'm going to do a transfer, and the transfer takes place over Ethernet, even though In my case, Pro Studio, Pro Server, and WinGP are all on my laptop. Finished normally. And now I can go into a WinGP trial version. And let's see what happens. I log on as the operator. And you'll notice that it's opened the output file spreadsheet. And as you can see, there's some activity already going on in the area that we defined. Let's put some real data in that. Let's actually simulate some production. Let's throw in a few rejects. And let's see how that behaves. Maybe wondering what happens if I actually close out that spreadsheet while we're still in active production. And I'm going to throw in a few more rejects. And then I'm going to go back to this folder and I'm going to open up this live production report. And there you can see that the data was continuing to log to the Excel sheet, even though it was effectively closed by the operator. I'll throw in a cycle stop to signify end of production. We can go back to the spreadsheet and note that the stop time was also logged. Now in reality, in a real production situation, it's quite likely that you wouldn't log the start and stop time once a second. You would log the start time once. You would then log the stop time once when that occurred. Those would both be one-shot data logs. And then you might keep a rolling production tally in a live spreadsheet. Now, once the operator logs off the machine, that was our condition to stop logging. The operator goes back to his logon screen. The ready message has stopped flashing here, and we've stopped adding data to the spreadsheet. So in just a few short steps from start through to transfer, we've turned our standalone HMI into a data logger, providing live data into an Excel spreadsheet. As you might have seen from some of the icons and options we got a glimpse of on the way through, we've really only scratched the surface of what this particular action can do. And then of course there are lots of other actions that Pro Server can do to add value to your HMI project. Pro Server comes with a built-in reference manual accessed from within the Studio software. So if you want to find out more about creating a form, some of the other options, for example, expanding the sequence of actions to include a mixture of Pro Server actions and Excel macros, and you can read all about it in this particular section. If you're brand new to Pro Server EX, then take a look elsewhere on our Learning Center and you'll find a series of step-by-step textbook tutorials, including a complete Pro Server EX course, which will take you all the way from what is Pro Server EX through the basic setup and monitoring on the AGP. There is a short feedback survey at the end of this presentation. Its completion is optional, but it shouldn't take more than a minute to go through it. Your cooperation helps us to continue to improve our quality of service. If you have any other training questions, please email them to training@profaceamerica.com. Thank you.